Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I would encourage you, if you have, maybe pick up a Chamisha Chumshe Torah. I'm going to refer to a few things inside. So if you'd like to, just get a Chamisha Chumshe Torah, and I'll walk you through what we're talking about. I mean, the general idea is I really would like to talk about the theme of what our Neviim speak about, Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu, in the Haftarahs of these few parshas, of the parshas of the 3 weeks, and especially Chazon Yeshayahu, the Haftarah of that we'll be reading in Shabbos Chazon this week. So I'm going to point out a few thoughts about some psukim or sets of psukim that might need some understanding, and perhaps I'd like to offer an interesting way of thinking about them. The first, the overall question is, the overarching question here is, why is it that our Neviim keep mentioning karbanos, sacrifices that were in the Beis HaMikdash, in a negative light? Lo mali rois of Chechem in this week's Haftarah. Again, if you look it up in this Chumash, it's the Haftarah of Parshas of Sefer Devarim of Chazon Yeshayahu. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm looking for the plate. You have them here. So it's on page 501, right? So in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Shimon Dvar Hashem Ketzinei Sodom. Hazinu Torah Salikenu Am Amora. Listen, you guys from Sodom and Amora, you chaps, lokes. What do you say around here? We say guys. Guys will do. Okay. So first of all, what's that with Sodom and Amora? How did Sodom and Amora get in here? And then he starts, Lamali Ravs Devchechem Amin Hashem. What do I need your karbanos for? I'm tired of your karbanos. When you bring them, it's an irritant. What's the message? Elamai, what should you do instead? Dirshu mishpat, pursue justice, support a widow and an orphan. And we see that this theme of karbanos keeps coming up. If you're interested in looking at the Haftarah of Parshas Tzav, it's an extremely harsh language. The Navi says, go pile up a bunch of meat and eat it. Who needs? I never asked you to bring karbanos. What's that with karbanos? It's almost like it's a sore subject that we keep referring to whenever there is a matzav, a situation where there's din and rebuke. Karbanos seems to be front and center. What was so special about karbanos, and what were Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu trying to convey to us? So I'd like to start with an interesting exchange back in Chumash. Have a look, please. That the context is when Avraham is davening for the people of Sodom and Amora. It's on page 46. If you have the Chumash, I do. It's in Parshas Vayera, Perik Yud Ches, Pasuk Yud Zayin. I had a very hard time. I never really understood these psukim. It seems, well, I'll leave it up to you, okay? So the Pasuk Tezvav starts, the people left Sodom, they left Avram Avinu. Avram walked them out, and Avram was standing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'Hashem Amar, I'm just reading the text now. Again, it's Pasuk Perik, Bereshis Perik Yud Ches, Pasuk Yud Zayin. V'Hashem Amar, Hamachasani me'Avram asher ani oisa. Am I not going to tell Avram what's going to happen to Sodom and Amora? And Rashi offers a few different interpretations. First step is, why do I have to tell Avram? So either I just promised them all of Eretz Yisrael, now I'm going to destroy part of it, so I got to let him know. He's getting the title. Or he says, I just told him, you're Av Hamoin Goyim, you're the father of the world. Now I got to tell him what's going on. These next two psukim. So listen. Avram's going to be a great nation. And all the people are going to bless him. He will bless them. I love him. Therefore, I want him to tell his children and his children's children, They'll watch the way of Hashem to do tzedakah and mishpat. L'man havi Hashem al Avram asher adibro. In order that I should bring all the brachas. And then he goes back. Vayomer Hashem zakas stam v'amora. Who is the Rishonim all? Look, I encourage you if you have a little time over Shabbos, perhaps, if you're fortunate enough today, look at what the Rishonim say. Who's Avram talking to? I'm sorry. Who's Hashem talking to? Excuse me. Come to think of it, somebody was kind enough to make me a coffee. I think I need it. I left it over there. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for taking care of it. Thank you. So, V'Hashem Amar, who is Hashem speaking to exactly? Thank you. It looks kaviyachol as if Hashem is speaking to the Malachi Hasharas, to the people. Who is he talking to? Rashi talks about it. In fact, if you look in Pasuk Chav, it says afterwards, Vayomer Hashem, Rashi says, El Avram. It's okay, this is a regular conversation now. So, what's all this? I love him, and I'm going to tell him to tell his children and his children's children to do tzedakah, mishpat, so I can bring. What does this have to do with Sodom? So, there are interpretations offered by Al Chazal. I'd like to share a thought, and I think it really relates to what I'd like to say. So, permit me to offer my own thought humbly. I'd like to suggest like this: every movement that starts with a great idea. Okay? Communism started out as the most beautiful idea. What was the backstory? In Russia, in Ukraine, those areas, there was a part, there was a squire, he owned the whole city, and everybody was his servants, basically. And there was one boss and a lot of poor people. And they came along and said, hey, it's not right, why shouldn't we share? So they overthrew the government, and they came up with this beautiful idea that everybody's going to be. A short time later, a generation or two later, everybody's in one big gulag. How does this happen? And you see this cycle in so many different areas. And I'm not familiar with the culture of this country. In America, we have, a thing called labor unions. Right? A labor union was where a bunch of workers got together, somebody organizes them and helps them. I'm sorry? Same trouble here, right. So it started out as a noble thing. People were making workers, work insane hours and kick back wages to them and didn't give them benefits. So they said, let's organize. A beautiful idea. And there are labor unions that do beautiful work, but a lot of them, the boss takes stuff going on. It's not what it originally started at. So I would like to suggest as follows. This is the cycle of the world. I also think it really explains this Golus and Geula, the Jewish people, our exile and the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash that we mourn, and the rebuilding in other places. I think that I'd like to suggest that it's part of the same cycle, that Golus isn't necessarily a punishment, but rather a reset button. So what happens is the idealist starts the organization or the movement, and he or she is great. They're passionate, they're committed. Let's take communism, for example. They really believe in this. Everybody has to share it. If somebody doesn't work, the people never. The religious people in Russia, in the yeshivas in Russia that we're learning, were tormented because you're not working. Everybody's pulling the wagon. If you're not working, that's apicursus, right? It's against our whole philosophy. So the idealist starts it, and his or her passion carries the movement for a while, and then slowly nepotism starts to set in. The boss puts his son-in-law, who might not be qualified, in there. They start doing some stuff, and there's some money coming in, there's power. All of these things corrupt. And 2 generations later, they're putting millions of people in Siberia. This cycle, that's the cycle. I would like to suggest as follows. What happened with Sodom? In Sodom, they had this horrible rule that nobody was allowed to have guests. Having a guest in Sodom was against the rules. How could a community make such a horrible rule? It's hard for me to believe that people got together and said, nobody's allowed to feed a stranger. You know what I think? I wasn't there. So, you're certainly free to disagree. I'll tell you what I think happened. What may have happened. I think the people in Sodom, 2 generations before this, made an aksanya, made a nice hotel for everybody to stay in. They said, why should people come? Let's chip in. Let's make a communal organization, and we'll feed the people. Too many people started coming. The people didn't like the whole idea. There were so many guests there, somebody decided to close it down, but the rules stayed. Something, I don't know. It may not have happened that way, but it's more likely, I believe, that it was an evolution of something that happened. But be that as it may, they had these really horrible rules there. If you have your chumash, let's go back to the pasuk, and then I hope it will shed light on Yud Zayin and Yud Ches, and that we talked about before, those 2 psukim, and I hope it will really explain what Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu are talking about. So let's read the next 2 psukim. After HaKadosh Baruch Hu finishes speaking to whomever, Kavyochel to himself, or to the Malachim, or to Hashem speaks to Avram. Vayomer Hashem. Rashi says to Avram, Zaka Sodom v'Amorah ki Rabba, the cries of Sodom and Amorah of these cities are many. V'chatasam ki kavda ma'od, their sins are very heavy or great. Erdana ve'era, Hashem says Kavyochel in the first person. I'm going to go and take a look. Haketza'akasa haba. What's these cries that I hear? I'm going to destroy them. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says Haketza'akasa with the mabekei. It's in the feminine. Her cries. So Rashi says Shel Medina. Short Rashi. It's in the feminine because we say the British Navy, her army, her navy, right? We speak about countries in the feminine. So therefore, he said, Haketza'akasa, I hear the cries of the city. What does the Medrash say?
Riva.
Riva achas. So the Medrash, we know, generally speak, it's an interpretation. It was not Haketza'akasa, the cries of the country, but rather there was one girl who did take a guest and they tortured her to death. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, at that point, it's over. That seems to have been from the Psukim, this. Let's step back again. So Sodom got destroyed because there was corruption. And the corruption was that the powers that be didn't want little folks, poor people coming and messing up the neighborhood, messing up the zoning. And they punished them. Hashem's about to destroy them. So if you accept this notion about this cycle, Sodom is at the end, at the last 2 minutes to 12, right? They're totally corrupt. Hashem is destroying them. Now Hashem says, I need Avram to know about this. Where's Avram in this? Again, if you accept this notion of a cycle, who's Avram in this?
Ideally.
He's the idealist. Avram is at a minute after 12, right? Avram's starting out. He's starting out. He's the idealist. So Hashem says, I want to tell Avram what's going on, but I'm not worried about Avram. He's fine. I'm not worried that Avram is gonna mess things up and go off the beaten path. Avram's the idealist. He's the Av HaMayin Goyim. He's starting this movement to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But I want to tell Avram that he should tell this to his children. I'm worried about Avram's grandchildren. Look back at the Psukim, and I'd like to suggest how perfectly it fits in. Avram, look back to the Psukim. Hashem is Amar, again, Pasuk Zayin. How can I cover from Avram what I'm about to say? Avram's also going to become a great nation and be powerful, and everybody's going to bless him. But I love him. Look at the words. Leman asher yetzave esbonav ve'esbeisai acharav. I want Avram to tell his children and his children's children what happens when corruption settles in. What happens when weak people are stepped on. Leman havi Hashem al Avram asher dibra. That's what I would like to suggest. That Hashem was telling Avram, put this in the DNA of your people. Tell this to your children and your children's children to make sure that the values of commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and commitment to the mitzvahs that has to stay always. Now, if you look also at another thing, V'shamru derech Hashem lasais tzedakah u'mishpat. If you read the words of Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu, that's something that comes up always. When they use the words tzedakah and mishpat, it refers to what? Teaching, treating people well. Okay, Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah. Okay, and it says again, if you look in the Haftarah, what is when he tells them afterwards? You know, you don't be like Sodom. You listen up, you guys from Sodom and Amorah. What does he say? Limdu heitev pasuk Yud Zayin in this week's Haftarah. Rachatzu hizachu pasuk Tez. Wash yourselves, cleanse yourself from the sin. Limdu heitev dirshu mishpat shiftu yasan rivu almana. Seek justice. Take care of a widow and an orphan. I would like to suggest that that's how Sodom and Amorah comes into this week's Haftarah. Because Sodom and Amorah were an example of what? I'm sorry? Of the opposite. Sodom and Amorah were the opposite of taking care of weak people. So it's almost as if you hear Yeshayahu screaming, guys, don't you get blokes, whatever. Don't you get it? Don't you get it? I don't need your karbanas. Take care of this. If you're treating people poorly, if you're treating people that don't have a voice poorly, so what do I need your karbanas for? Let me offer another thought in addition to this. Oh, so what does karbanas have to do with it? So simply you would say karbanas were an example of religious practice, of a mitzvah, a beautiful mitzvah. I always say that a carbon in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when people's wealth was measured by head of cattle, right? A dowry was 4 cows. You know, that was the currency. The currency was animals. So a carbon was taking a car off your driveway. That's really what it was. I got a whole collection of I have 6 cars at home, automobiles, and I take one, or I take it one and I donate it to the shul. That's a beautiful thing. Who brought karbanas? Rich people. The people who are most likely, or could be chas v'shalom, susceptible to mistreat people who don't have power. So that's why I would like to suggest the karbanas come in. The people of the time were obviously weak in this area of tzedakah u'mishpat. So Yeshayahu was telling him, what are you bringing your karbanas for? It's beautiful, it's nice, but who needs it? This is not what I took you out of Mitzrayim for. This isn't what I called on you to become a great people. So I think that fits in. That's why, if you accept the notion that the corruption and the sin was people in the seats of power abusing people who don't have power, then it's perfectly logical why Rashi, the Medrash, comes along and says Haketza'akasa. So the Rashi says the regular pshat is Shamadina. Hashem was hurt, or was upset by the cries of the city, the cries emanating from the city. The Medrash says it's much more specific than that. Haketza'akas riva achas, the cries of a little girl that was crying that she was hurt by these bosses of this town that didn't like the fact that she was independent-minded and took care of a weak person and gave them food. And I think that that's really what Golus forces us to reset. Is a beautiful, in the interest of time, I would encourage you, if you want to have a look at the Das Kenim B'Balei Tosfos on the Mabul. We know Hashem punishes Midah Keneged Midah. What does the Mabul have to do with, what does that have to do with, the flood have to do with sin? So, the Das Kenim B'Balei Tosfos, it's a long piece, he gives a mashal there. He says that basically it was a reset of the world. The world originally started with Tohu Vavohu. There was water, and Hashem carved out a space and made land on the water. Hashem said, this isn't working out. You guys are getting corrupt. Let's start all over like an Etch-a-Sketch. Those toys that you write on the kids, and you pull it up and you start again. That Golus was a reset. Hashem said, let's go back to where it was before. We have to start again. And I think that's really the midah keneged midah of our bitter galus throughout the years, where we had so many times where we were uprooted. I would say that among other things, it's a challenge for us to think about it in those terms. I do a lot of work in child abuse prevention, child safety. We published a few books to help parents speak to children about it. And over the years, I've had the zchus to advocate for abuse victims and stand with them as they, especially one in particular, a very high-profile case in Brooklyn, where I stood with the victim when she went to testify against a very powerful, well-connected person. One of the, not always, but very often, the abuser is a powerful person who's well-connected, people who know people, come from the right families, and there's a grooming process where they select b'dafka children who come from families that aren't that well set up, that there might be stress. If you're interested, I really would encourage you. I have it's a 9-minute video about how to speak to your children. Have a look. If you just do a Google search, Yakov Horowitz, child safety. It's 9 minutes, that's all it is. It really help you understand how to speak to your children about, tell your children to speak, those who are grandparents. It's easy, child safety education is extremely helpful. What it really does is it teaches children to let the abuser know that they were spoken to about child safety. Abusers are afraid of children who are in close families, where parents speak to the children regularly, and they're afraid of children who are educated, who know that they have a right to personal space. That's why child safety education is so helpful. But that's the pattern. The pattern is that strong people abuse weak people. People who are connected, again, not always, but almost always. And I believe that the Torah's obligation, when the Torah speaks to us, these have Torahs about standing with the weak and doing the opposite of what was done in Sodom. I think there's no better example of it than an abuse victim. Because they're the Riva Achas, they're the little girl or the little boy who was abused by an uncle or somebody else in the neighborhood or someone in the school. Most abusers are from the close, that inner circle of people who know the child well. And I really believe that the Torah mandates that we stand with the victims, that we stand with them. If you read, again, I encourage you, you can look up online, again and again and again. I've spoken to so many victims. Many people, they say that it was more painful to them not being believed and being yelled at. It was worse than the abuse itself. And it sounds like a guzma, but that's what they say. Now, somebody abused them, but they came to somebody else in the community and said, somebody hurt me, and they say, oh, stop it, don't make it up. And then you say, oh, look at him, look who the abuser is, I don't know, So, I'm going to close with a discussion, a fascinating discussion that takes place in Parshas Vayishlach. I thought of this 2 years ago when I saw it in the Parsha, and I got the chills, I got the goosebumps when I thought of it. This is the story of Dinah. Dinah was abused, right? Shem ben Chamar, the son of the mayor of the city, abused Dinah. Shimon and Levi stuck up for her. They told everybody to get a bris milah. They killed all the people in the city. If you have this chumash that I do, it's on page 101. I'd like to point out two things that I found fascinating. It's pasuk lamed. So again, it's Parshas Vayishlach, Perik lamed dalid, pasuk lamed, and pasuk lamed aleph. So this narrative is at the end of the story where Yaakov admonishes Shimon and Levi. Why did you do this? What did you do? You went and destroyed. You killed all these people. Let me read the lashon to you. Vayomi Yaakov Shimon and Levi. Yaakov tells Shimon and Levi, "Achartem oisi, you embarrassed me. Lahavisheni biyoshvei haaretz, aknani v'aprizi." Rashi says, It was quiet. The barrel was settled. Baruch Hashem, we don't appreciate what that means. People used to draw water from the well or from the river. It was muddy, and they had to let it sit for a couple of days till the sediment settled. That's really, it's so hard. That when I taught this Rashi, Tzlula Ha'Sachav, you have to explain to the kids what it means. 100 years ago, nobody had to explain it because that's what that was their life. So the mud settles to the bottom. Rashi said, Tzlula Ha'Sachav, the barrel was quiet. I had just dealt with love and I dealt with Esav. It's quiet. What's that tunnel? So you mushed it all up. You embarrassed me in front of the people where I live right now, where we're traveling through. We're just a few of us, and they're going to destroy us. And the two of them said, is our sister Azayna? And Rashi doesn't translate that word literally. It looks like Rashi's being politically correct. Rashi says hefker. Rashi changes the word from Zaina to hefker, which is not really the translation. So it looks like Rashi's doing, Rashi's writing an Egel Lashon for a polite Lashon so kids can learn it in yeshiva. But here's what I'd like to suggest. And again, we think of Yakov Avinu as we should, as one of our avos, this giant. When he was traveling through Shem, he was just a traveler with a family that had no friends and didn't know anybody in town. Who started up with Dina? People who know people. So the son of the mayor, people who know people, it struck me. It was so powerful when I thought of it. People who know people, the mayor's son went and abused this little girl who was from some person who was passing through with this family who didn't know anybody there. So I'll tell you what really got me. I speak to families now, but when they have a victim who needs to go forward to stop the abuser from abusing other people, and what do the victims say? Look at the pasuk. We're going to be embarrassed. If we come forward, it's going to bring a shanda on the family, and they're going to kill us. Those are the two things I hear every single time. Or most of the times, at least. When we speak to a family, and they say, yeah, but look who the abuser is. They're not going to believe me against him or against her. How could it be? We're going to be embarrassed, and they're going to kill me.